April 2003. The outskirts of the village of Semivragy in the Domodedovo district near Moscow. It had been raining all week, and the ground under the feet of Alexei Rozhkov, who was walking through the grove toward the edge of the village, was slightly muddy. The elderly man has to walk carefully and watch his steps so as not to stumble and slip into the mud. Almost no one walks through the grove, only the local villagers. There are no paths here, and Alexei simply walks among the trees, over the ground and the remaining patches of snow. He constantly looks down at his feet, and that's why he almost immediately notices something strange ahead in a small ravine. Rags, shoes, bare knees. It takes Alexei a moment to realize what is in front of him. Snowdrop, the half-decomposed body of a woman in a coat and boots, carelessly covered with branches and brushwood. For a while, Alexei stares at it blankly, examining it as if trying to identify it. However, that's impossible. The face of the corpse is disfigured by decomposition. Almost nothing remains of the tissues. I should report this to the police, the man thinks, walking almost resolutely in the direction of the village. But what if someone is looking for this person after all? But he will only report it a week later. During this time, the body of 25-year-old Tatyana Gluzinskaya will be thoroughly eaten by wild animals and stray dogs. This circumstance almost allowed the person who took her life to avoid the punishment he deserved. Tatyana Vernik was born in Moscow into a loving family. She was the only daughter of well-off parents who were business people. Tanya was a late child. Her mother was 35 and her father was 39 when she was born, and her parents adored their long-awaited child. From early childhood, the girl was spoiled with attention and never knew refusal in anything. It was enough for her to pout or stomp her foot, and her mom or dad would rush to fulfill the wishes of their beloved child. Her room was always full of toys, and the most beautiful dresses hung in her closet. Tanya was her mom and dad's princess. The girl was exceptionally beautiful, with dark hair and big gray eyes. At school, boys would run after Tanya in crowds. They fought over her, and everyone competed to invite her to dance at school parties. But Tanya hardly had any girlfriends. The girl had a complicated and eccentric character. She was proud and stubborn, with a passionate nature. Spoiled by her loving parents, Tanya rarely compromised and refused to admit when others were right. She was an excellent student, spoke English fluently, and dreamed of living and working abroad. Tatyana realized the power of her feminine charm very early and wasn't shy about using it. Since school, there was always a crowd of admirers around her, but the girl usually just teased them and never clearly favored anyone. She knew her own worth and wasn't going to settle for anything less. Tatyana Vernik was called the Snow Queen. Everyone knew that behind this cold beauty was a cold heart. After school, Tatyana Vernik attended secretary courses at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. New acquaintances, new opportunities, and the girl felt in her element, realizing that she could fulfill her ambitions. Persistent and hardworking, she graduated from the courses with honors. Her parents were proud of Tatyana. They had raised a wonderful daughter. Soon Tatyana met a guy named Andrzej Gluzinska. Andrzej was from Poland, courted her beautifully, and almost immediately made it clear that he was serious. Tatyana's parents also almost immediately approved of the young man's candidacy. The foreigner seemed very intelligent to them, often gave their daughter gifts, behaved modestly and respectfully. He never even hinted at intimacy before the wedding and treated his bride like a queen. Andrzej immediately stated that they would live in Poland. "I always said that you deserve the best. You found a foreign fiancé and will go abroad to see the world," sighed mother, suddenly starting to cry. "Don't forget us, daughter." Tatyana hugged. Mother was crying too, and swore she would never forget. In 1997, Tatyana Vernik married Andrzej Gluzinski, and the young couple moved to Poland, to the city of Poznan. 2 years flew by like in a fairy tale. A loving husband, prosperity, new friends. Tatyana traveled a lot and saw Europe. The couple was already planning to have children, and the woman quietly started setting up the nursery. But one day everything changed. On that day, Tatyana and her husband decided to visit their friends in Warsaw. The weather was clear, the road was dry, and the car was speeding like an arrow. Both Tatyana and Andrzej were already looking forward to a few days in good company, when suddenly a car swerved into the oncoming lane. The woman didn't even have time to understand what had happened. Wild pain, a scream, and darkness from which she returned already in the hospital, lying under an intravenous drip. Both cars were sent from the accident scene to the scrapyard. The drivers, female passenger, and those responsible died at the scene. Tatyana suffered a severe combined fracture of her arm and a fracture of her femur. Anzi had a broken spine. In an instant, a healthy 30-year-old man became disabled, bedridden. The doctors were encouraging, saying that Anzi would be able to walk. There is a chance, but it will take a long time to recover. Rehabilitation will take months, if not years. The outlook for both spouses was bleak, but they had no alternative. The surgeries began, along with endless hospital visits and treatment. Tatyana also had to undergo surgery. A metal plate was inserted into her hip. Since then, she started having pain. Tatyana was forced to constantly take painkillers, but they barely helped. The woman often spent sleepless nights in bed, tossing and turning as she tried to find a more comfortable position for her leg. After everything, she still had to care for her husband. Tatyana didn't show him her pain. She was too proud and didn't want Andrzej to feel guilty or like a burden to his mother. She didn't complain either. She knew that her mother would worry, only close friends knew. Tatyana soon discovered that alcohol helped her deal with insomnia. The woman started drinking, a glass of wine before bed, then half a bottle. Alcohol became a habit for Tatyana, and she couldn't fall asleep without it, worsening the situation. Because of alcohol, Tatyana was often irritable, and in the mornings she had headaches and felt nauseous. Andrzej noticed his wife's condition and tried to talk to her, but Tatyana didn't want to listen to him. "I'm tired, leave me alone," she snapped at the woman and slammed the door. After some time, she would come back and ask for forgiveness, but the relationship between the spouses was clearly cracking. Scandals began in the family. It seemed that the beautiful fairy tale was turning into an ordinary soap opera. A sick husband who needed care, a constantly irritated wife who was turning to the bottle. Andrzej saw that Tatyana was drifting away from him, but he couldn't do anything about it. He understood that this was not at all what a 25-year-old woman dreamed of, but did he choose such a fate himself? He went crazy with jealousy at the thought that Tatyana would find herself another healthy man. Scandals happened more and more often. At the end of November 2000, Tatyana told Andrzej that she intended to go to Russia to visit her parents. She told her husband that she would not return before New Year's, that she wanted to spend the holidays with her family. Andrzej let his wife go with a heavy heart. Later he would tell his family that he had a premonition. He would say, "I knew that Tatyana would not come back." At home, Tatyana was awaited with open arms. The mother cried when she saw her thinner daughter Tatyana with dark circles under her eyes. It was obvious Tatyana was unhappy and suffering. When her mother asked her how long she intended to stay at home, Tatyana looked away. She still loved her husband and worried about him, but she was simply tired. She wanted to be a little girl again. She wanted to forget about worries and anxieties for a while and just be at home. Very quickly, Tatyana renewed her friendship with her few girlfriends. Upon learning of the Snow Queen's return to Moscow, her past admirers recalled her as well. At 25, Tatyana remained a stunning beauty, a real beauty. Men still turned their heads when she walked by, and Tatyana enjoyed it. She realized that she missed it too. She missed flirting, the lightness, the attention. Tatyana wasn't planning to cheat on her husband. She loved him, but a little harmless flirting helped her chase away the sadness and reminded her that life doesn't end. Closer to New Year's, Tatyana felt herself slipping into depression again. She started drinking wine before bed again, and it seemed like even her mother noticed. A few days before the holiday, on December 19th, her mood completely dropped. Tatyana admitted to herself that she missed her husband. She wanted to see him. Sad thoughts tormented her until the very evening. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore and called her friend Elena. "Are you home? I'll come over now." Elena lived alone and was not married. She was happy to receive Tatyana's call and said that she would be waiting for her. Tatyana told her mother that she was taking a taxi to her friend, kissed her and left. That was the last time her family saw her alive. 2 hours later, Elena called the Vernikov's apartment, sounding surprised and displeased. "Where is she?" "Tanya is missing. It's already 11 post-meridium. I'm waiting for her." Tatyana's mother was surprised because Tatyana left immediately after the call. Maybe she stopped by a store somewhere. She must be in line, she suggested. But Elena dismissed that version. She recently called me from a borrowed cell phone and asked me to bring her some money. She didn't have enough to pay for the taxi. I waited outside until I was freezing, but she never came up. It was strange. Both women were confused and worried. Tatyana didn't have her cell phone, so they couldn't find out where she had disappeared to. Maybe something happened. After discussing it, both women decided that it wasn't worth panicking just yet. Tatyana is an adult woman, so her absence probably has a reasonable explanation. She might have met someone during her trip, especially with the holidays approaching. Maybe she saw someone she knew and stopped by for a quick visit. Even if she stayed with a man, that's her business. She'll definitely call, knowing people are worried, but Tatyana didn't call, neither at night nor in the morning. She never made it to a friend, and she didn't return home. Even for such an eccentric person, this was just too strange. The mother stayed awake all night, and in the morning she immediately went to the local police station. The woman told the officer on duty what had happened, and asked to file a missing person report. The young man listened, asked some clarifying questions, and advised her not to worry. An adult woman? Maybe she just dropped by to see some man. It's a young person's thing, he said indulgently, voicing what had crossed Tatyana's mother's mind yesterday. Come back in 3 days if she doesn't show up earlier. We can't accept the report yet. The woman couldn't imagine how she would spend 3 days in anxiety, and if Tanya was in danger, she needed help. She needed to be searched for immediately. Tatyana's mother tried to persuade the officer on duty to accept the report, practically begging him. My Tanya would never just disappear like that. Something happened. The man shrugged his shoulders, stating the law establishes a 3-day period. After 3 days of Tatyana's absence, the statement was finally accepted. A search case was opened, standard procedures were carried out, witnesses were questioned, and alerts were sent out. New Year's was approaching, so the work was done reluctantly and slowly. Most of the activities were postponed until after the holidays. Investigators are always busy with numerous cases. The case of Gluzinski's disappearance was just one of them. Finally, New Year's had passed and the winter holidays were over. Tatyana's mother despaired over the lack of news while her husband in Poland was going insane. But the police didn't seem to be in any hurry either. They worked just as slowly, without rushing. Finally, they found out the cell phone number of the man from whose phone Tatyana had called. It turned out that the phone belonged to a certain Viktor Polyakov, a taxi driver. The young man came to the station and did indeed remember that shortly before New Year's, he had given a ride to a beautiful girl. She really did ask him for his cell phone, called her friend, then the girl paid and left. He doesn't remember anything else. The taxi driver was the main witness in the case, but after his interrogation, the investigation didn't have a single lead. They couldn't find the woman right away. The case turned into a typical cold case. Winter passed with no news about Tatyana. Her mother cried, took Korvalol, and prayed that her daughter was alive, no matter where she was or what mistake she might have made, as long as she was alive. But her hopes were not fulfilled. She never saw her daughter alive again. In April 2001, that is, more than 4 months after the disappearance of Tatyana Gluzinskaya, in a grove near the village of Semivragi in the Domodedovo district of the Moscow region, a woman's body was discovered. Alexei Rozhkov reported his discovery only a week later, and during that time, stray animals had badly damaged the body. No one wanted to conduct the identification. Well, it's a corpse in a grove. How many of these snowdrops come out from under the snow in the spring? After all the formalities, the body was buried at Novodevichi Cemetery under a number. Naturally, no one connected the body that was found with Tatyana Gluzinskaya. They remembered about her closer to May, when one of the investigators once again came across the missing person case. The young investigator, unbothered by the cold case, decided to check the body. Taking a couple of colleagues, he went to the cemetery. Tatyana's grave was shallow, they dug it up quickly, and the cemetery workers took out the coffin, opened the lid, and the investigator immediately swore. What was left of the body was impossible to identify. The remains were piled up chaotically, just any which way, and the tissues had basically turned into jelly. The body was sent straight to the morgue in the coffin for a forensic examination. It was necessary to determine whose body it was, and most importantly, to establish the cause of death. And that's where the difficulties began. It turned out that the body did indeed belong to a young woman, and that a metal plate had actually been implanted in her hip. The body could have belonged to the missing Tatyana, but the cause of death could not be determined. The remains were old, they had been in the ground for half a year. The tissues had decomposed and were torn apart by animal teeth. And yet the investigation got its first lead. It was decided to go through the witnesses again and summon that taxi driver, Polyakov, who had given Tatyana a ride, the owner of the phone she used to make a call that fateful evening. At the same time, it turned out that the man had already managed to sell the Zhiguli he had used to drive passengers around half a year ago. It seemed like nothing strange, but the investigators decided to check the car just in case. They found out the new owner's information. Under the pretext that the car had been involved in an accident, they inspected the interior. They paid special attention to the seat covers. The new owner confirmed that he hadn't changed them. And a new lead. On the front seat covers, they found brown stains, very small, barely noticeable at first glance. The covers were immediately seized for examination. The brown drops turned out to be dried blood, and after DNA analysis, it became clear that the blood belonged to a woman. Viktor Polyakov could no longer be overlooked. Polyakov appeared for questioning on time, behaved politely, and was dressed neatly. His biography was completely ordinary. 25 years old, single, medically exempt from military service, works as a taxi driver, no permanent job, no criminal record, no criminal past. The man calmly answered questions and stuck to the version he had given earlier. He gave the girl a ride from Lipetskaya Street to the Olympic Village. I remember her well. She was pretty and talkative. When we arrived, she asked me for my cell phone and called her friend. I don't remember what they talked about. I wasn't listening. What happened next? The investigator asked. I said I dropped her off at the store and didn't see her again. An ordinary passenger, an ordinary call. It seemed like nothing strange. The testimony was recorded. Polyakov read it, nodded in agreement, and signed. Finally, the investigator offered him to look at the photos of the victim, Tatyana alive, and her remains found in the forest. Maybe he'll remember something else, some detail. Polyakov opened the case file, saw the first photograph, and it was as if he went into a trance. It seemed he couldn't take his eyes off the photograph of the dead and living girl. He kept flipping through the pages of the file, returning again and again to the photographs of the remains. The investigator saw Polyakov literally mesmerized. He simply couldn't take his eyes off. He was literally shaking with excitement. Finally, after looking at the photos, the man closed the file. He looked up at the investigator and realized that denying it was now pointless. After that, he asked for a lighter, lit a cigarette, and started talking. On the evening of December 19th, 2000, Viktor Polyakov decided to earn extra money after his shift, as he usually did. He drove away from home and almost immediately noticed his first passenger. A dark-haired, well-dressed girl was hitchhiking by the roadside. She asked to be taken to Olympieski Avenue, and the man agreed. When the girl entered the car, Polyakov detected the scent of costly perfume. He glanced at the passenger's face and was surprised. What a rare beauty, a real movie star. He shifted his gaze to her hands. There was no wedding ring on her finger. Soon Polyakov couldn't resist anymore. He started asking questions and flirting. The girl, who introduced herself as Tatyana, seemed not to mind. She laughed, kept the conversation going, and smiled. Polyakov almost felt sorry. When they reached their destination, he was already gathering his courage to ask the beautiful stranger for her number when she suddenly said that she had forgotten her wallet at home. No problem. I'll approach my friend and we'll settle it. Polyakov refused to leave, despite Tatyana's persistent persuasion. After some time, they realized they didn't want to separate. Polyakov boldly suggested they continue the evening at his place. Tatyana hesitated for a moment. It was clear that she had been waiting for this invitation. On the way, they stopped by a store where they bought a bottle of champagne. According to Polyakov, Tatyana took a few sips straight from the bottle right there in the car, as if she couldn't wait. They reached Polyakov's apartment, where he resided with his parents, who were absent at the time. They went to the theater and were supposed to return only late in the evening, so there should have been enough time. Polyakov set the table, poured champagne into glasses, and they drank to the upcoming holidays. Tatyana was becoming more and more attractive to the man. She sat down on his lap and clearly let him know that she wasn't against intimacy. A couple more glasses of champagne and the pair ended up in bed. Polyakov told investigators everything was consensual, with no coercion involved. After the intimacy, Tatyana remained in bed, not in a rush to get dressed. Polyakov checked his watch. It was nearly 11. As the parents were expected back from the theater soon, it was time for Tatyana to go home. He asked her directly to leave, but Tatyana, slightly tipsy, just wanted to sleep. She suddenly declared that she would stay at Polyakov's for the night and wasn't going anywhere. In an instant, the new acquaintance stopped being a welcome guest for Polyakov. Yes, he was an adult man, but he clearly didn't want to explain to his parents about an unfamiliar girl in his bed. Especially since Tatyana had already revealed that she was married but didn't live with her husband. I tried to persuade her, but she didn't even want to get out of bed. She just lay there naked, Polyakov told the investigator. I was talking to her, but she covered herself with the blanket and turned away. Then I started pushing her off the bed. We started struggling. Polyakov stated that Tatyana started insulting him and said that she had acquaintances who were criminal authorities, and that they would make him pay if he didn't leave her alone. Polyakov was furious at how this swindler would try to boss around in his house and even threaten him. He was also already a bit drunk, and soon the argument turned into a full-blown fight. Tatyana was hitting him, kicking him, trying to scratch him with her nails. At some point, Polyakov punched her in the face. There was a crunching sound and Tatyana fell to the floor screaming, clutching her nose with her hands. Blood started to flow. Polyakov got scared and, as if he came to his senses, even sobered up. He hurried to Tatyana, urging her to get up and assisted her to the bathroom. There, he handed the woman a cold, wet towel. I swear I didn't mean to, Barmatalon. His heart raced as he feared she might report the incident to the police and he wouldn't be able to prove it was self-defense. Tatyana pressed a wet towel to her face, and for a while they sat in the bathroom in silence. But after a brief pause, the woman suddenly jumped up and attacked Polyakov again. You broke my nose, how am I supposed to go home? You're finished, I'll sick my guys on you, she started shouting, waving her fists. A blow, another blow, and Polyakov grabbed the belt of his bathrobe. He threw it around Tatyana's neck, pushed her to the floor, and began tightening the belt. Tighter and tighter, the drunken woman began to wheeze, thrashing desperately and furiously under him. But Polyakov was stronger. He wanted to make Tatyana be quiet forever. He pressed with all his strength and only came to his senses when Tatyana stopped showing any signs of life. The criminal felt no remorse. Almost immediately, he began to think about how to get rid of the body. Polyakov put a coat and boots on the corpse, slung it over his shoulder, carried it out of the apartment, and placed it under the stairs on the first floor. He needed a plan. That day, elections were being held in Moscow, and the police were working in an intensified mode. Polyakov understood that the car would definitely be checked. How could he get the body out unnoticed? Suddenly, an idea came to his mind. Polyakov left the house, got into the car, and drove toward the region via the so-called Zagoryevsky Bridge. As he approached the police checkpoint, he deliberately began to move uncertainly, slowing down. Polyakov was stopped, his documents were checked, and the car was inspected. Nothing suspicious was found. He crossed the bridge, drove around a bit, and returned home. He put the body in the trunk and drove back across the same bridge. The inspector was the same one. Polyakov reminded him that he had passed through here literally 20 minutes ago. They checked the car, found nothing, and the inspector waved his baton. Yes, I remember. Go ahead. Polyakov didn't go far. He was already tired, and the places where Tatyana had hit him started to hurt. He would even have to see a doctor the next day, complaining about pain in his groin. He stopped near the village of Semivragi, dragged the body into a small grove. It was empty and quiet all around, and no one noticed him. After laying the corpse on the ground, Polyakov covered it with branches and brushwood, hesitated for a second, and then went back home. The investigators had no doubt that Polyakov was telling the truth. He was taken into custody right in the office, and that same day an operations team went to his house. They found no traces of blood on the furniture or walls, but they seized the bathrobe belt that had been used to kill Tatyana. However, it would later turn out that there were no suspicious traces on it. By that time, Polyakov had a lawyer, an experienced specialist who immediately suggested a new line of behavior to his client. Tatyana's body was so badly decomposed that the examination could not reliably determine the cause of death. The neck tissues had decomposed, and the missing hyoid bone created a loophole. "I want to change my testimony," Polyakov suddenly told the investigator. "Last time I gave my testimony under pressure from the investigation, I was forced. I had no intention of taking Tatyana's life, I just wanted to tie her hands so she wouldn't hit me. She died on her own." Polyakov stated that while Tatyana was in his apartment, she not only drank alcoholic beverages but also took some kind of pills. According to him, the woman could very well have felt unwell from such a combination, since everyone knows that some medications are incompatible with alcohol. "I only disposed of the body, then fear struck me. It was clear I'd be their prime suspect," Polyakov solemnly declared. By that time, 2 lawyers were already working on the criminal's defense. They were both insisting that Polyakov be released from custody. "He's not a criminal, he's a victim. He was tortured to force a confession. The woman is already dead, the guy is 25, and he's facing real prison time. The reasons remain unclear, and an innocent person will end up imprisoned, according to investigators and lawyers." In the end, due to lack of grounds for further detention, Polyakov had to be released from custody. On the day of his release, he was offered to sign an interrogation protocol with a detailed description of the crime and his actions. That evening, he did it in the presence of lawyers, and 5 minutes later, he was already free. However, this was not the end of the story yet. The investigator understood that the case was falling apart and that he needed to act carefully and quickly. The case materials were sent for examination. There were only 2 questions. Could Tatyana have died from poisoning, and under what circumstances could her death have occurred? The specialist studied the transcript of Polyakov's interrogation and paid attention to his words about Tatyana's death. She had convulsions, her whole body was shaking, and white foam came out of her mouth. All this lasted no more than half a minute, after which she became still. The description matched the clinical picture of death from mechanical asphyxia. This meant that Tatyana could indeed have been killed by the belt from her robe. Polyakov signed this protocol in the presence of the lawyers. The expert examination's conclusions were meant to be relied upon in the court session. All that was left was to wait for it. However, just before the trial, the suspect's interrogation recording vanished from the case files. The main piece of evidence, Kontsov's, could not be found. There was no one to suspect, but it didn't matter. The videotape disappeared. Without it, the prosecution couldn't convince the court of Polyakov's guilt, and the sentence was remarkably lenient. Viktor Polyakov was charged with causing serious bodily harm, and as punishment he was given a suspended sentence. Such a punishment seemed to surprise even Polyakov's lawyers. Both they and their client left the courtroom with broad smiles on their faces. However, their joy was premature. The investigator found the original video recording and a new court hearing was scheduled with a different judge. When the secretary took the videotape out of the sealed envelope, Polyakov and his lawyers turned pale, but there was nothing they could do anymore. According to the verdict of the new court, Viktor Polyakov was sentenced to a real prison term. He was given 10 years of imprisonment.